Alright, here's the start of a new series of videos on this channel, which is me reading short stories in hunks. So when I finish this section, I'll just try and press stop and then it'll just go to the next section on a playlist. So I won't do any outros. So let's start with the intro, which is, I'm going to read from An Honest Thief by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I got this off of Gutenberg. I don't know who the translator is. I would have to look that up. Yeah, it was written in, I think, 1848. Let's start and see how far I get, how many minutes. An Honest Thief. One morning, just as I was about to set off to my office, Agrafena, my cook, washerwoman, and housekeeper, came in to me and, to my surprise, entered into conversation. She had always been a silent, simple creature that, except her daily inquiry about dinner, she had not uttered a word for the last 6 years. I, at least, had not heard anything else from her. "Here I have come in to have a word with you, sir," she began abruptly. "You really ought to let the little room." "Which little room?" "Why, the one next to the kitchen, to be sure." "What for?" "What for? Because folks do take in lodgers, to be sure." "But who would take it in?" "Who would take it in? Why, a lodger would take it in, to be sure." "But, my good woman, one could not put a bedstead in it. There wouldn't be room to move. Who would live in it?" "Who wants to live there? As long as he has a place to sleep in, why, he would live in the window." "In what window?" "In what window? As though you didn't know. The one in the passage, to be sure. He would sit there, sewing or doing anything else. Maybe he would sit on a chair, too. He's got a chair, and he has a table, too. He's got everything." "Who is he, then?" "Oh, a good man, a man of experience. I will cook for him, and I will ask him 3 rubles a month for his board and lodging." After prolonged efforts I succeeded at last learning from Agrafena that an elderly man had somehow managed to persuade her to admit him into the kitchen as a lodger and a boarder. And any notion Agrafena took in her head had to be carried out. If not, I knew she would give me no peace. When anything was not to her liking, she at once began to brood, and sank into a deep dejection that would last for a fortnight or 3 weeks. During that period my dinners were spoiled, my linen was mislaid, my floor went unscrubbed. In short, I had a great deal to put up with. I had observed long ago that this inarticulate woman was incapable of conceiving a project, of originating an idea of her own. But if anything like a notion or a project was by some means put into her feeble brain, to prevent it from being carried out meant, for a time, her moral assassination. And so, as I cared more for my peace of mind than for anything else, I consented forthwith. "Has he a passport anyway, or something of the sort?" To be sure he has. He is a good man, a man of experience. 3 rubles he's promised to pay." The very next day the new lodger made his appearance in my modest bachelor quarters. But I was not put out by this. Indeed, I was inwardly pleased. I led, as a rule, a very lonely hermit's existence. I have scarcely any friends. I hardly ever go anywhere. As I had spent 10 years never coming out of my shell, I had, of course, grown used to my solitude. But another 10 or 15 years or more of the same solitary existence with the same Agrafena in the same bachelor quarters was in truth a somewhat cheerless prospect, and therefore a new inmate, if well behaved, was a heaven-sent blessing. Agrafena had spoke truly. My lodger was certainly a man of experience. From his passport it appeared that he was an old soldier, a fact which I should have known, indeed, from his face. An old soldier is easily recognized. Astafy Ivanovitch was a favorable specimen of his class. We got on very well together. What was the best of all, Astafy Ivanovitch would sometimes tell a story, describing some incident of his own life. In the perpetual boredom of my existence, such a storyteller was a veritable treasure. One day he told me one of these stories. It made an impression on me. The following event was what led to it. I was left alone in the flat. Both Astafy and Agrafena were out on business of their own. All of a sudden I heard from the inner room somebody, I I fancied a stranger come in. I went out. There actually was a stranger in the passage, a short fellow wearing no overcoat in spite of the cold autumn weather. What do you want? Does a clerk called Astrov live here? Nobody of that name here, brother. Goodbye. Why would Dvork tell me it was here? Why would the Dvork tell me it was here? Said my visitor, cautiously retiring towards the door. Be off, brother. Get along. Next day after dinner, while Hnst Thf was fitting on a coat which he was altering for me, again someone came into the passage. I half opened the door. Before my very eyes was yesterday's visitor, with perfect composure, Before my very eyes, my yesterday's visitor, with perfect composure, took my wadded greatcoat from the peg, and stuffing it under his arm, darted out of the flat. Agrafena stood all the time staring at him, agape with astonishment, and doing nothing for the protection of my property. Hnst Thf flew in pursuit of the thief, and 10 minutes later came back out of breath and empty-handed. He had vanished completely. Well, that's a piece of luck, Hnst Thf. It's a good job your cloak is left, or he would have put you right in a plate, that thief. But the whole incident had so impressed Hnst Thf that I forgot the theft as I looked at him. He could not get over it. Every minute or two he would drop the work upon which he was engaged, and would describe over again how it had all happened, how he had been standing, how the greatcoat had been taken down before his very eyes, not a yard away, and how it had come to pass that he could not catch the thief. Then he would sit down to his work again, then leave it once more, and at last I saw him go down to the dvornik to tell him all about it, and to upbraid him for letting such a thing happen in his domain. Then he came back and began scolding Agrafena. Then he sat down to his work again, and long afterwards he was still muttering to himself about how it had happened, how he had stood there, and how I was here, how before our eyes, not a yard away, the thief took the coat off the peg, and so on. In short, though Hnst Thf understood his business, he was a terrible slow coach and a busybody. He's made fools of us, Hnst Thf, I said to him in the evening as I gave him a glass of tea. I wanted to while away the time by recalling the story of the lost greatcoat, the frequent repetition of which, together with the great earnestness of the speaker, was beginning to become very amusing. Fools indeed, sir. Even though it was no business of mine, I am put out. It makes me angry, though it is not my coat that was lost. To my thinking, there's no vermin in the world worse than a thief. Another takes what you can spare, but a thief steals the work of your hands, the sweat of your brow, your time. Ugh, it's nasty. One can't speak of it. It's too vexing. How is it that you don't feel the loss of your property, sir? Yes, you are right, Hnst Thf. Better if the thing had been burnt. It's annoying to let the thief have it. It's disagreeable. Disagreeable? I should think so. Yet, to be sure, there are thieves and thieves, and I have happened, sir, to come across an honest thief. An honest thief? But how can a thief be honest, Hnst Thf? There you are right indeed, sir. How can a thief be honest? There are none such. I only meant to say that he was an honest man, sure enough, and yet he stole. I was simply sorry for him. Why, how was that, Hnst Thf? It was about 2 years ago, sir. I had been nearly a year out of a place, and just before I lost my place, I made the acquaintance of a poor lost creature. We got acquainted in a public house. He was a drunkard and a vagrant, a beggar. He had been in a situation of some sort, but from his drinking habits he had lost his work. Such a ne'er-do-well, God only knows what he had on. Often you wouldn't be sure if he had a shirt under his coat. Everything he could lay his hands upon he would drink away. He was not one to quarrel. He was a quiet fellow, a soft, good-natured chap, but he'd never ask. He was ashamed, but you could see for yourself the poor fellow wanted a drink, and you would stand it him. And so as we got friendly, that's to say, he stuck to me, it was all one to me. And what a man he was, to be sure. Like a little dog he would follow me. Wherever I went, he would be. And all that after our first meeting, and he was as thin as a thread paper. At first it was, let me stay the night. Well, I let him stay. I looked at his passport too. The man was all right. Well, the next day it was the same story, and the third day he came again and sat all day in the window and stayed the night. Well, I thinks I, he is sticking to me. Give him food and drink and shelter at night too. Here I am, a poor man, and a hanger on to keep as well. And before he came to me he used to go in the same way to a government clerk's. He attached himself to him. They were always drinking together, but he, through some trouble of some sort, drank himself into the grave. My man was called Emelian Ilyich. I pondered him, and pondered what I was to do with him. To drive him away I was ashamed. I was sorry for him, such a pitiful, God-forsaken creature. I never did set my eyes on. Not a word said either. He does not ask. He just sits there and looks into your eyes like a dog. To think what drinking will bring a man down to. I kept asking myself, how am I to stay to him? You must be moving, Emelianushka. There's nothing for you here. You've come to the wrong place. I shall soon not have a bite for myself. How am I to keep you too? I sat wondering what he'd do when I said that to him, and I seemed to see how he'd stare at me, as if he were to hear me say that, how long he would sit and not understand a word of it. And when it did get home to him at last, how he would get up from the window, would take up his bundle, I can see it now, the red checked handkerchief full of holes, with God knows what wrapped up in it, which he always had with him, and how he would set his shabby old coats to right, so that it would look decent and keep him warm, so that no holes would be seen. He was a man of delicate feelings. And how he'd open the door and go out with his tears in his eyes. Well, there's no letting a man go to ruin like that. One's sorry for him. And then again, I think, how am I off myself? Wait a bit, Miliushnushka, I say to myself, you've not long to feast with me. I shall soon be going away, and then you will not find me. Well, sir, our family made a move, and Alexander Filonich, my master, now deceased, God rest his soul, said, I am thoroughly satisfied with you, Astrave Ivanovich. When we come back from the country, we will take you on once again. I had been a butler with them. A nice gentleman he was, but he died that same year. Well, after seeing him off, I took my belongings, what little money I had, and I thought I'd have a rest for a time. So I went to an old woman I knew, and I took a corner in her room. There was only one corner free in it. She had been a nurse, so now she had a pension and a room of her own. Well, now, goodbye, Emelianushka. Emelianushka, thinks I, you won't find me now, my boy.